Hello, everybody. We are up to a new book in our Bible reading. We're up to First Corinthians. We're going to open up in prayer here, and then we're going to read the introduction to First Corinthians. So opening up with Deuteronomy 6:4 tonight. Shema Yisrael, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. Baruch Shem Kivo Mahuto Leolam Vahed. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh is our Elohim, Yahweh is one. And you should love Yahweh with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And have these words I command you this day be upon your heart. And you shall teach them diligently to your children, and speak of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you retire and when you rise. And you shall bind them for a sign upon your hand, and let them be frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. Okay, here we are, First Corinthians, looking at the important information and the purpose of this book. And we do an introduction to First Corinthians, is to identify the problem in the Corinth church, to offer solutions, and to teach believers how to live for Yeshua in a corrupt society. And this was written by the Apostle Paul. And the original audience was the church in Corinth, and the date written was approximately AD 55, near the end of Paul's 3-year ministry in Ephesus, during his third missionary journey. And the setting in Corinth was a major cosmopolitan city, a seaport, and a major trade center, the important city in Achaia. It was also filled with idolatry and immorality. The church was largely made up of Gentiles. Paul had established a church on his second missionary journey. And as we read here, it says, a bed of grass, a chameleon skin turns green, or chameleon skin turns green. On the earth, it becomes brown. The animal changes to match the environment. Many creatures blend into nature with Yahweh-given camouflage suits to aid their survival. It's natural to fit in or adapt to the environment, but followers of Yeshua are new creations, born from above and changed from within, with values and lifestyles that comfort the world and clash with the accepted morals. True believers don't blend in very well. The Christians in Corinth were struggling with their environment, surrounded by the corruption and every conceivable sin. They felt pressure to adopt. They knew they were free in Yeshua, but what did this freedom mean? How should they view idols or sexuality? What should they do about marriage, women in the church, and the gifts of the Spirit? These were more than theoretical questions. The church was being undermined by immorality and spiritual immaturity. The believer's faith was being tried in the crucible and immoral Corinth, and some of them were failing the test. Paul heard of their struggles and wrote this letter to address their problems, heal their divisions, and answer their questions. Paul confronted them with their sin and their need for corrective action and a clear commitment to Yeshua. After a brief introduction, Paul immediately turns to the question of unity. He emphasizes the clear and simple gospel message around which all believers should rally around. He explains the role of the church leaders and he urges them to grow in their faith. Paul then deals with the immorality of a certain church member and members in the issue of lawsuits among believers. He tells the believers to exercise church discipline and to settle their internal matters themselves, because so many of the problems in Corinth, the church involved sex. Paul denounces sexual sin in the strongest possible terms. Next, Paul answers some Corinthians questions because prostitution and immorality were pervasive. Marriage in Corinth was shambles, and Christians weren't sure how to react. Paul gives pointed and practical answers concerning the question of meat sacrificed to idols. Paul suggested they show complete commitment to Yeshua and sensitivity to other believers, especially weaker brothers and sisters. Paul goes on to talk about worship, and he carefully explains the role of women, the Lord's Supper, and spiritual gifts. Sandwiched in the middle of this section of his magnificent description of the greatest gift, love, then Paul concludes with the discussion of the resurrection. Some of these final greetings and a benediction. This letter confronts the Corinthians about their sins and shortcomings, and 1 Corinthians calls all believers to be careful not to blend in with the world and accept its values and lifestyles. We must live a Yeshua-centered life, blameless, loving lives that make a difference for Yahweh. As you read 1 Corinthians, examine your values in light of the complete commitment to Yeshua. So those are the themes here that we're discussing in this letter of Paul. Paul addressed the divisions of the church and disorder in the church. And Paul answered their questions on marriage, freedom, worship, and the resurrection. That's what we're looking at here. The major themes of this book are loyalties and immorality, dealing with that, freedom, worship, and the resurrection. This is what we'll be discussing in this book, 1 Corinthians, as we read another book of the scriptures. So thank you for joining me for this book, this important letter, and we'll get started right now. Shalom, shalom.